What actually happened just 26 minutes ago that made Jungkook suddenly go to the office and leave an item behind, triggering a reaction from Taeyong that instantly set everything ablaze? Is this merely a routine gesture, or the most shocking clue yet to something that has long been kept hidden? That question suddenly flooded fans' timelines within minutes, as brief yet explosive information spread rapidly and uncontrollably, igniting speculation, assumptions, and emotions that blended hope, anxiety, and an almost unbearable curiosity. There was no official statement.
No clarification.
Only one fact made this feel different from anything before. Jungkook went alone to an office, outside any public schedule, and left behind an item whose contents remain unknown, while Taeyong's subsequent reaction only made the situation harder to understand. Why did everything shift so dramatically just 26 minutes later? Why do so many people feel this was anything but trivial? In the tightly monitored world of K-pop, no detail is ever truly small. Especially when it involves Jungkook and Taeyong, two figures who for years have stood at the center of attention not only because of their talent and popularity, but also because of the emotional dynamics often read between gestures, glances, and unspoken moments. So when news surfaced that Jungkook had gone to an office and quietly left something behind, academic yet deeply emotional questions immediately arose. What was the urgency? Why now? And why did Taeyong react the way he did? Unnamed internal sources described the atmosphere at that moment as quiet but tense, a description that only added another layer of mystery. Jungkook was said to have arrived without a large entourage, without official camera coverage, and without any agenda listed on public schedules. In an industry as structured as Korean entertainment, such irregularity often signals something personal, urgent, or deeply emotional. Was this connected to a major decision? Or a responsibility that could no longer be postponed? The item left behind quickly became the focal point of all speculation. No one knows for certain what it was or what it contained, but that very uncertainty sent imaginations into overdrive. Some suspect it was an important document, while others believe it was a deeply personal object loaded with emotional meaning. What elevated this story from rumor to serious discussion, however, was Taeyong's reaction after becoming aware of Jungkook's action. Witnesses described it as unusual, far removed from the relaxed demeanor he often shows in public. Was Taeyong shocked? Was he angry? Or was he hurt? Those questions hang unanswered, yet one thing feels clear. Taeyong's emotional response strongly suggests that Jungkook's action carried far more weight than it appeared on the surface. Within minutes of the news spreading, fans began connecting this incident to fragments of past events, searching for patterns, clues, and hidden meanings that may have been overlooked until now. Notably, many focused on the timing itself. To some fans, 26 minutes is not a random number, but something potentially symbolic. They wondered whether it related to a specific schedule, an internal deadline, or an emotional moment known only to those involved. In semiotic analyses, often applied to popular culture, time, place, and action frequently carry interconnected symbolic meanings. So was this, perhaps, a concealed message? Equally intriguing was Jungkook's choice to leave the item rather than hand it directly to Taeyong. Did this signal emotional distance? Or was it a cautious move to avoid escalating tension? In complex professional and personal relationships like those common in the entertainment industry, such small gestures can reflect much larger dynamics beneath the surface. The uproar surrounding Taeyong's reaction does not necessarily imply an obvious emotional outburst. In this case, the shock came from subtle yet significant changes. Observers noted differences in body language, a more guarded facial expression, and an air of restraint. In the study of nonverbal communication, such subtle shifts often indicate internal conflict or unresolved emotion. Why, then, did this incident so quickly ignite collective emotion among fans? The answer may lie in the long narrative history surrounding Jungkook and Taeyong. For years, the public has viewed them as symbols of synergy, closeness, and unspoken understanding. Any deviation from that narrative, however small, feels like an anomaly demanding explanation. Thus, news of a quietly deposited item and an unusual reaction felt like a disturbance to an emotional equilibrium many fans held dear. Some also linked the incident to the increasing pressures of the industry itself. Packed schedules, public expectations, and internal demands often force decisions to be made quickly, sometimes without room for explanation. In this context, Jungkook's action could be interpreted as an attempt to resolve something efficiently, even at the cost of direct communication. But did Taeyong see it the same way? Speculation intensified as fans revisited old statements, awkward moments, and subtle signals once dismissed as insignificant. Could those fragments now be forming a clearer picture? Or was the public constructing a narrative far removed from reality? Here, the line between analysis and assumption becomes blurred, and that blur is precisely what gives this story its power. From an academic perspective, this phenomenon illustrates how fan culture operates in the digital age. Limited information combined with strong emotional investment creates vast interpretive space. Every action by an artist becomes a text to be read, analyzed, and interpreted by millions, each bringing their own background and perspective. In the case of Jungkook and Taeyong, that text becomes even more complex due to the long-established emotional narrative surrounding them. Yet beneath all the analysis and speculation lies a human dimension often forgotten. Jungkook and Taeyong are not merely symbols or narratives. They are individuals with emotions, considerations, and burdens of their own. Leaving an item behind may feel mysterious and dramatic to the public, but for them it may have been a difficult, yet necessary decision. The question is whether the public is prepared to accept a truth that may be far simpler or far more complicated than all the theories circulating. So far, official silence has only amplified the story's echo. No clarification has arrived to quiet speculation, no statement to close the discussion. Each passing minute without explanation feels like another chapter added to an already emotionally charged narrative. Is this silence intentional? Or simply a matter of time before the truth surfaces? What cannot be denied is the emotional impact of that moment 26 minutes ago. It reopened old questions, sparked new concerns, and highlighted how fragile the balance is between public image and private reality. Will the item left behind become the key that answers everything? Or will it stand as a symbol of something that may never be fully revealed? As time moves forward, one truth remains undeniable: the power of a small moment to reshape a much larger perception. Jungkook went to an office, left something behind, and within minutes the fan world trembled. Taeyong's striking reaction became a mirror reflecting the depth of meaning behind that act. And until the truth comes to light, that opening question will continue to echo: what really happened and why now? As the hours continue to pass, the absence of confirmation slowly transforms curiosity into unease, and unease into emotional projection. Fans are no longer asking only what the object was, but what it represents. Was it an ending disguised as a routine action, or the beginning of a conversation too heavy to be spoken out loud? In situations like this, silence is never neutral. Silence becomes a canvas, and on that canvas, people paint their deepest fears and hopes. Every second without clarification allows imagination to harden into belief, and belief into narrative. What makes this moment especially charged is how sharply it contrasts with the image long associated with Jungkook. Known for his openness and emotional transparency, his decision to leave something behind instead of addressing it face-to-face feels almost paradoxical. That contradiction alone fuels suspicion that the matter was not simple. If it were ordinary, why cloak it in such quiet urgency? If it were insignificant, why did Taeyong's demeanor reportedly shift so noticeably afterward? These contradictions sit at the heart of the growing tension surrounding the story. Observers familiar with industry behavior note that visiting an office without public documentation is rarely accidental. Such visits often involve legal, contractual, or deeply personal matters that require discretion. This has led some to question whether the item left behind was not merely symbolic, but functional, something that carried consequences beyond emotion. Could it have been related to future plans, unresolved obligations, or decisions that could alter trajectories? The lack of visible panic does not negate seriousness. Sometimes, the calmest actions carry the most irreversible weight. Taehyung's reaction, meanwhile, continues to be dissected with microscopic attention. Not because he spoke, but because he did not. His restraint, his silence, his refusal, intentional or otherwise, to publicly contextualize the moment has only intensified the emotional gravity. In cultural studies, silence from a figure known for expressiveness is often interpreted as disruption. It suggests something has interrupted the natural flow of communication, replacing it with caution or internal conflict. That possibility alone unsettles many who believed they understood the emotional language between these two figures. As theories multiply, a deeper question emerges beneath the noise. Why does this moment feel final to so many people? There is a subtle sense of threshold embedded in the narrative, as if something crossed an invisible line when Jungkook walked into that office and walked out without explanation. Threshold moments are powerful because they are often recognized only in retrospect. At the time, they appear small. Later, they are remembered as the point where everything quietly changed. Emotionally, the public response reveals as much about collective attachment as it does about the event itself. Fans are not reacting only to an action, but to the potential loss of continuity. The fear is not merely that something happened, but that something familiar may no longer exist in the same form. When relationships, real or perceived, have long served as emotional anchors, even ambiguous disruption can feel profoundly destabilizing. There is also an ethical tension underlying the coverage of this story. At what point does analysis become intrusion? At what point does curiosity cross into appropriation of private emotion? These questions are rarely asked in moments of heightened drama, yet they linger uncomfortably in the background. Jungkook and Taehyung did not narrate this moment, others did. And that distinction matters when trying to separate truth from projection. Still, the narrative continues to evolve, shaped not by facts but by reactions. Each new interpretation becomes part of the story's ecosystem, feeding into the next wave of speculation. In this way, the event is no longer static. It is alive, changing shape as it moves through digital space. What began as a quiet visit and a left-behind item has expanded into a symbolic event with emotional resonance far beyond its physical reality. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that nothing dramatic will ever be confirmed. That this moment will remain suspended in ambiguity, unresolved yet unforgettable. History shows that some of the most enduring stories in popular culture are not those with clear conclusions, but those with unanswered questions. They linger precisely because they resist closure, inviting endless return and reinterpretation until clarity emerges. If it ever does, the moment remains open-ended. Jungkook's action stands alone, Taehyung's reaction echoes without explanation, and the space between them becomes the loudest part of the story. In that space, meaning multiplies, emotions intensify, and a simple question refuses to fade. Was this just a quiet exchange, or the signal of something far bigger than anyone is ready to name yet? That unanswered question continues to hover, heavy and unresolved, because moments like this rarely exist in isolation. They draw power from everything that came before them. Every shared stage, every interview filled with laughter, every subtle pause that once seemed insignificant is now being re-examined under a harsher, more emotional light. The past is being reread through the lens of the present, and in that rereading, certainty dissolves. What once felt stable now feels conditional, as if meaning itself has shifted slightly out of alignment. What complicates this further is the instinctive human need to assign intention. People struggle to accept that an action can exist without a clear, narratable motive. So the theories grow more elaborate. Some suggest protection, others sacrifice, others a quiet attempt to shield someone from consequences not yet visible. None of these interpretations can be verified, yet each one gains emotional traction because it feels plausible within the long, shared history the public believes it knows. Plausibility, in moments like this, often replaces proof. There is also the question of why this action happened now. Timing is rarely neutral in environments governed by schedules, contracts, and careful planning. A spontaneous act stands out precisely because it disrupts routine. That disruption invites the assumption that something internal reached a breaking point, that waiting was no longer an option. Whether that breaking point was emotional, professional, or something more complex remains unknown, but the sense of urgency implied by the timing continues to unsettle those watching from the outside. For Taeyong, the weight of interpretation is perhaps even heavier. His reaction, or perceived reaction, has become a kind of emotional mirror. People are not only asking what he felt, but what he was forced to process in silence. Silence, in this case, is not empty. It is dense with expectation. When someone known for expressive authenticity chooses not to speak, that absence becomes a statement in itself, whether intended or not. It creates a vacuum that others rush to fill. Psychologically, this dynamic reveals how deeply audiences internalize the emotional narratives of public figures. The bond is not one-sided admiration. It is an ongoing emotional exchange, built over time through consistency and familiarity. When that consistency is disrupted, even subtly, it can feel like a personal loss. That is why this moment resonates so intensely. It challenges a sense of emotional continuity many had come to rely on. At the same time, there is a quieter interpretation that receives far less attention, that this was an act of care rather than distance. Leaving something behind instead of delivering it directly could signify an attempt to give space, to avoid confrontation, to allow processing without pressure. In emotionally complex relationships, restraint can be a form of respect. But this reading lacks the dramatic edge that fuels viral discussion, and so it struggles to compete with more alarming narratives. The media ecosystem amplifies that imbalance. Stories that suggest rupture travel faster than those that suggest nuance. Headlines gravitate toward shock because shock generates engagement. In this environment, even ambiguity becomes a tool, stretched and shaped into something louder than it may deserve to be. The risk is that repetition hardens speculation into perceived reality, leaving little room for alternative explanations once they eventually emerge. And yet, despite all the noise, the core truth remains inaccessible. Only those directly involved understand the full context of that brief visit, that unseen item, that quiet reaction. Everyone else is operating on fragments. This gap between access and assumption is where misunderstanding thrives. It is also where myths are born. What makes this especially poignant is the possibility that the meaning of the event may never be publicly defined. Not all moments are meant to be explained. Some are resolved privately, their significance known only to those who lived them. If that is the case here, the public may be left with nothing but echoes and interpretations, forever circling an answer that will not arrive. Still, the emotional aftershock persists. It lingers because it touches something fundamental, the fear that connection can change without warning, that familiarity does not guarantee permanence. Whether or not this fear reflects reality is almost beside the point. What matters is that the moment activated it, and once activated,